what would replace the concept of intention in this way of understanding is the will of God, is intention. That's intention. You have to really, you really have to accept the concepts that are involved in these teachings in order to move beyond the concepts, right? Because obviously, if you're still in the place where you say, well, I don't get it, or I disagree, or whatever, well, then you haven't even accepted the concept. So there's no point in going any further, until the time comes when you do accept the concept. Then all there is for you to do is either leave, go find something else that you do accept, right? Or stay in the process of understanding and looking at the evidence and looking at the explanation and looking at the way the concept can be taken apart and broken down so you can see it more clearly and so that at some point you can accept it. But until you accept the concept, there's no possibility to go beyond it, because why would you? Why? If you are in disagreement, if you don't get it, if it doesn't fit your ideas, right, which is what not accepting the concept means, right? Doesn't fit your ideas, doesn't fit your conditioning, doesn't fit your understanding, right? Then basically, whether you're aware of it or not, you're choosing that conditioning and that understanding over the truth. Not because I say so, right? Because as I said earlier, the truth, the definition of the truth is that it's true, it's real, it's actual. It explains how things happen. If you stay involved in looking, not thinking, but if you stay involved in looking at what's happening and take the concepts that these teachings provide to look at what's happening, you will see that the concepts are describing what's happening. It's not a belief. It's actually, the evidence is actually what's occurring. If you get the concept that you're not the doer, right? Or you get the concept that you're not the thinker, and you're willing to, even if it's just a matter of you're willing to try it on. You're willing to try it on. You're willing to see, okay, if I go through my day with the idea that this concept is true, and I look at what's happening with the eyes of somebody who sees this truth, what will I see? What will the difference make? One of the fears that people have about this idea that you're not the doer is that, how will I live my life? Things might happen that I don't want to happen. I don't like that. I don't like that idea, right? How will I live my life if I'm not the doer? What will I do? What's it mean not to be the doer? If I accept that I'm not the doer and I stop being the doer, what does that mean? Do I I don't do anything? Right? I don't do anything because I'm not the doer, so I don't do anything. That's the mind, right? That's the mind trying to come in and talk you out of the truth. The reality of it is, and it's not hard to see this, if I were to snap my fingers and you would stop having it that you're the doer, guess what? Things would go on the same as they have. Why? Because you never were the doer. That's the illusion. So nothing will change. Things will go on the way they have. The only difference will be, now watch, the only difference will be that you won't have to be responsible for it. That you won't have to be concerned anymore. That you won't have to think that you've got to get it right. You won't have to think that you've got to figure it out. You won't feel the stress of having to do all that anymore. It isn't that there won't be figuring out going on. It isn't that there won't be decisions made, right? But you won't feel the burden of that. You will just let that happen, trusting the truth, that the source is what is expressing itself in your thinking. The source is expressing itself in your behavior, in what you're doing. And the way that, would then begin to appear is that if you really were to let go, right, just give it to God, right? Thy will be done. You have nothing to complain about. Now just notice, just try this on. You would have nothing to complain about because, why should you complain? Because not only are you not the doer, but if you're not the doer, nor is anyone else the doer. There's no doer. It's just happening. It's all just happening, right? And that which is the source of what's happening is having everything happen in accordance to its laws, in accordance to its nature, right? And you can't understand that nature unless you think that you're God, right? Now here's where things get a little more complicated. It's not that you're not God, because if there's no doer and the source is acting through you, then you must be God. It's not that you're not God, right? But you are God manifest, incarnate into a human form. And part of what happens when that happens is you get cut off from God's mind. You get cut off from God's knowledge. So you cannot understand why God is doing what God's doing. And in reality, there is no answer to that question, because there is no why that God's doing what God's doing. Because from a human perspective, one of the mistakes that people make is they personify God. They personify consciousness. They personify the source. They personify isness, right? It's not a person. Therefore, it's not doing things good or bad, right? It's not doing things that are insensitive or sensitive, right? It's the energetic reality that is happening the way it's happening. If you're in the divine hypnotic state, if you're in the divine trance, then you're cut off from the source, right? You're cut off from the source. And if you're cut off from the source, it means that you now see yourself as separate, as a doer, separate from other people, separate from the world, right? And then that sets up the possibility of considering yourself a victim, right? And the thing about this is that this is the hardest concept for the person to digest, because it gets to the root of it. It gets to the heart of the matter, right? Gets to the heart of the matter. Even when it comes to the idea of enlightenment, right? Which by the way, enlightenment is a ruse. It's a ruse. And the only reason enlightenment exists is to put a carrot in front of the person. That's all. Because how this process has to begin, it has to begin with you where you're at. And where you're at, where people are at, is they're in the person. They're in the world of the person. Right? So you have to talk to the person who sees themselves in time, who sees themselves as the doer, as if they can get out of something they're not in. You have to talk to the person as if enlightenment is possible, right? Well, what's enlightenment? What's enlightenment? Enlightenment means you realize the truth, right? Well, if enlightenment means you realize the truth, it means that you realize that you're not real. So who's going to get enlightened? Who's going to get enlightened? If you realize that you're not real, does the awareness that is the source, that is one, is the one, does that need to be enlightened? No, that doesn't need to be enlightened. There's no such thing as enlightenment. There's actually no such thing as enlightenment. But even if I say that, right, you will still try. I guarantee you will still try. But you see, here's the deal. If what I'm saying is true, if it's the truth that there is no doer, right, which means you have no choice, right, which means that nothing happens without the will of the source allowing it. If you want to call it God, nothing happens without God's will, right? Even you're considering yourself to have free will is out of your control. You see? So it's all happening according to the source. And the idea that you have free will, allows you to discover that you don't. Otherwise, you couldn't. Allows you to discover that you're not who you thought you were. Otherwise, you couldn't. You see, this is where it gets tricky, right? Because the idea that you're not the doer doesn't then mean don't worry about what happens to other people. That's an interpretation. If it's true that you're not the source, and you worry about what's happening to other people, that's God's will. You see? Yeah, the person keeps trying to get out of it. The person will keep trying to get out of it. Yeah, it's not a question of where you're born. It's a question of the kind of conditioning and the social conditioning, the collective conditioning of that reality. And so everything, the person that was talking about this study, he said that him and his daughter were somewhere for breakfast, and they came out of this place that they had breakfast, and there was a guy there who put his hand out begging, and it was pitiful because he appeared to be very embarrassed. He wasn't like a practiced beggar. He obviously just really needed help, right? And so he put his hand out, and the guy's daughter went in her purse, and she didn't have any coins, so she gave him a 1 rupee bill. In India, I don't know what a rupee is, but it's more than change, right? And the old man started to cry. So you have that, and then you have somebody who, and in the same story that this guy was telling, you have somebody who he met that was a businessman who was obviously well off, right? And he said, "Wow, you must be really happy. You have all this money. How much money do you have? And the guy said, something like 10 million rupees. I don't know how much that is, but it's a lot of money, obviously, right? And so this guy said to him, "Well, then you must be really happy." And he said, "Well," he said, "What do you mean? How can you not be happy? You're rich. Yeah, you can, have anything you wanted." And he said, "Well, my neighbor's got 30 million rupees." So and the more you have, the more there is to get, right? You don't have to look at and you see the difference between the guy that had all that money and he wasn't satisfied, and the poor old man that got 1 rupee cries. So this is why in the poorer countries they're happier, because if they get a little more money, it's a big deal, right? But in our country, a little more money doesn't mean much. Doesn't mean much. So these things are the evidence for the truth. And like I say here all the time, you can either keep operating with your understanding or your conditioning or your ideas. You can keep operating with that, and keep studying and keep trying to get good or better at whatever, more different and better. Or you can realize it's not going to go anywhere. There's nowhere for it to go. There's no end to that. And in the end, what you'll discover is what everybody discovers. In terms of the things that matter the most, you have no control, and you never have. You can't stop your body from aging. You can't stop the fact that your body is going to die. You can't control anything that's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, do you? You see, but if you have come to accept the concept that there's no doer, and you start allowing yourself to see things from that perception, then no matter what happens tomorrow, it won't have the same impact, will it? Because it's God's will. And there is no promise the truth does not promise that you will. And this is another myth that the person believes, that, if I get enlightened, if I accomplish this self-realization project, I'll be blissful, I'll be happy and blissful the rest of my life. You know, I had this when I was a young man. You have this image of these gurus in India with flowers all around them, right? And people come to your feet. So you figure, wow, that must be cool. Maybe I'll go for that. You know, I'll just be blissful, just sitting there blissful, all soft-spoken all the time, just sitting there blissful, sharing the love, having people bring flowers to me, coming to my feet, asking me to bless them. That's total bullshit. That is total bullshit. That's a myth that came out of the Indian culture, not intentionally, right? It was actually a part of a real devotional tradition, but it was perceived from the Western eyes to be something to accomplish. So this process of practicing meditation and this process of learning about the concepts and understanding the concepts and practicing what it's like to be you, letting go of, these beliefs, letting go of these ideas about how things are, about how things should be, about how things work. This process for a person is very challenging, right? Yeah, for a person it's very challenging because it's so radically different. What could be more radical than to say that who you think you are, who you've been being, the person you've been being, the doer, that's invested your energy in accomplishing things and doing things, right, doesn't even exist. There's nothing that could be more radical than that, right? So that investment that you have had in that being true, and the investment that people all around you have in that being true, keeps pulling you to it, doesn't it? Keeps pulling you to it. It will keep running your mind will keep running that program, and everybody around you is running that program. And you will keep believing that it makes sense to escape from pain and to seek pleasure. You will keep believing that that makes sense, right? Which means you'll suffer, because it's not possible to escape from pain and seek pleasure. It's not possible. Life is pain and pleasure. So what's your agenda? What do you plan on doing? Not being in life? Not experiencing life? Or, I've been very interested in suicide because it's one of the biggest mistakes human beings make. Because anybody who kills the body has failed at committing suicide. Anybody that kills the body has failed at committing suicide. Because the only way you could succeed by killing the body is if the body is the self, right? You're killing yourself. Right. But the body's not the self. Right. So you're killing the vehicle that the self has used to be in the world. Right. But you haven't succeeded in suicide. I've been holding this part back because you already got it enough to choke on, right? But the other part of there not being a doer is that there is no free will and that everything is predetermined. Everything is predetermined. If there's no free will, everything is predetermined. The way the teachers talk about this is they say it's like the film is made and in the can. It's all done. This is all done. It only looks like it's happening because of your view in time. It only looks like it's happening because of your view in time, which means there was something in the past and there'll be something in the future, right? But no, there's no time. Everything has already happened. In the eternal now, it's all there already. Because your view is a view in which you're only seeing this part, it looks like something has happened and something will happen. But it's actually all happened already. Don't try and understand that. If you're buying into this, if you're seeing what's being pointed to here, if you understand the relevance of it, if you understand how important it is, if you understand that everything hinges on this, then you keep looking at the concepts, you keep developing a deeper understanding of the concepts. You keep looking to see how the concept is real by looking to see the evidence for the concept. And then, of course, to put it into practice means that you have to then That's why I said what I said when we did the practice today. To put it into practice means that you have to allow yourself to experience what it's like to be who you are. Which means to simply exist. To simply exist. Without attempting to control anything. Allowing yourself to experience the freedom that is, to simply exist, allow yourself not to try and control everything. It's been described as like a free fall, right? It's like a free fall. But the only difference between this free fall and the typical free fall is in this free fall, there's no ground. There's no ground. So it's like skydiving, right? It's like skydiving, but there's no ground. So you can just be excited and enjoy the fall. Okay, I think I've given you enough to stumble on. I'll see you in the next meeting, God willing.